So the first thing I want to do is, you might notice that this is very flickery. So I want to, I mean, it's very flickery. I do have controls over the threshold, so that's very noisy, and I can do, I can control so this is less flickery, but it's still, I want temporal smoothing, basically. And if that's not clear what that is, I'll show you what I mean. So before I go into that, I'm going to move this across, and let's create a null here. And then while that null is selected, right click in an empty area and do collapse. So we have a base, and let's call this smooth. And all that this is going to do, I'm going to call that out straight away, and let's visualize it. Oh, I'm going to switch that to, I'll switch this one to a top viewer. And can I do that, put that there? Yeah. And I'll select that, common, let's change that again to nearest pixel. And also this one to nearest pixel. So at the top, I have my kind of master output, but here I want to do some temporal smoothing. And we know how to, I'm just going to use the feedback. So I'm going to put a feedback. This is just the standard. And then I'm going to put that there. And then I'm going to create a crossfade. So at this point, we need to make sure that we're afloat. We're float. So if I middle click, yeah, it's 16-bit float. This is why I changed it back. If you don't make it a float, if you keep it 8-bit, so just first let me explain what's happening. And I'm just going to select everything and make all of it nearest pixel. So this feedback is keeping track of the previous frame. And here I'm cross-fading between the current frame and the previous frame. And if I do 0, it's fully the current frame, because that's the first input. This is fully the previous frame. And if I do somewhere in between, have a look here at the bottom one, it's basically leaving trails. So this is, so you can see if it's 0, they're disappearing very quickly, appearing and disappearing very quickly. If it's close to 1, they're coming in and out quite slowly, and they're fading out quite slowly as well. If you compare the top to the bottom. This is just softening the movement. So that's one, that's smooth. And I'm going to create another one of these. I'm just going to copy paste it. I could make it a component. I'm too lazy. Let's call that smooth low. And that's smooth. Actually, no, before I do that, sorry. Let's go in. Let's customize. Because I want to put that bind. And the feedback, I need to put the reset pulse to be able to reset the feedback. And what I need to do is, now you might be thinking, if I change this to like 20 to 10, look at the bottom, that's what's happening at the top. At the bottom, it's not working. Why is it not working? Because incoming is 20 by 10, but my feedback is still 6 by 4. I need to reset my feedback. That's why I put this reset of the feedback on the parameter, and now I can go to my grids reset, which, if you remember, in the grid, I preemptively, of course I didn't do this preemptively at the time I didn't do this, and then I ran into this bug and I realized I have to do this. This reset is going to be called as soon as this is changed, so now I can just take that, copy that, and bind it to that. So now if I change that, it sends a pulse, it triggers that pulse triggers this pulse, that pulse triggers my feedback, and you can see that at the bottom it's correct. 12, again that's correct. So I'll call this one smooth high. So this is doing a lot of smoothing. This is going to be better for the visuals, but I want to create another one and call that smooth low. Let's visualize that, and I'm going to do less smoothing on that, so it's still doing a bit of smoothing. I could have created a component, but it's so simple that I didn't. Smooth that out of the way. So now I want to act on this. And what I want is, so now if let's lower my grid size. Right, let's make it say 3 by 1. Or let's make it 3 by 2. My threshold is too high. I'm doing movements here in the bottom right. You can see that this, well, because I'm talking, actually this one is also, okay, I'll just do my head. So this is, no, that's too tiring. I'm doing the bottom right, and you can see that it's kind of flashing. But the reason it's flashing is because the amount of movement is changing, because the number of pixels, because the way we did it with the with no interpolation, it's effectively counting the number of pixels within this block, and that's being represented in the color of this. But what I want is, I want a version where it goes white the minute I start moving, but then while there's movement, it's still black. That's going to be my trigger map. So what we want is, we want a version of this diff, because, well, let's just think about what we want to do. In fact, let me not use that diff. Let me build it from scratch. Null. I put a null there, and then let's collapse, and let's call this trigger. And let's go inside. Get rid of that null. Add an out. And let's put that there. Select them both. Make them nearest pixel. Okay, so we want a version of this which turns white the moment it triggers, but then goes black. So the first thing we want to do is add a threshold, because you want something binary. We know you want something binary. If you want something binary, we're probably going to do a threshold. Do a threshold. I don't want to act on the alpha. I don't want it to be see-through. It's too hard to follow. Okay. So this is something. It's not what I want because the threshold is too high. So what this does is, if the value is above 0.5, it's white. If it's less, it's black. And 0.5 is 50% gray, which is, you know, pretty difficult to achieve here. Let's lower that. And we can make this super low because, well, let's just adjust it to somewhere where if, okay, that's too low. Okay, so this is a trigger threshold. Okay, so this is good. This is like an on-off state. If I move my hand here. Okay, now what we want is, we want something where if it becomes white when it was previously black, then I want it to be white. But if it was white in the previous frame, then I want it to be black. This is the same thing that we did. This is, now we can use the frame differencing. So I can, actually what I can do is, let me call this thresh. And let's immediately customize that. and put that thresholds there. So that's that thresh, maybe make it a bit lower. Because what I want is, I want a solid white. If I'm moving like this, it's still flashing too much. Okay, that's better. And now let's copy that diff and put that diff here. And this time let's feed that in. Again, I could make this a component, but I can't be bothered. So this is now going to be diff. This is my trigger. Let's visualize that. Select all of that and nearest pixel. Oh, that wasn't on. Okay. We can't use, we couldn't make diff a component because we don't want the blur at all. I don't want the blur at all. And also we don't want the levels afterwards. We don't even want now this is a bit tricky. We don't even want the function, because otherwise what's going to happen is it's going to become white when it's also going from off to on. So let me move my hand. Okay, the thresholds are a bit too crazy. Let's tweak that a bit. Let's make this, say, 10 by 6. And then, yeah, that's -5. This is visualizing let's just visualize the thresh. Okay, that looks good. So when I'm moving, it's white. When I stop moving, let's also actually go back. It's in the diff. Yeah, this threshold. Oh, that's 0. Why is that so low? Oh, that's why it was so manic. Oh, that's better. Okay, I don't know why I made that was 0. So the diff thresholds make that whatever, something that's non-zero. Let's make the cells a bit less now, 4 by 3. Okay. The diff thresholds. And then here, so this is like the thresh. Let's make that thresh can be tiny. This thresh. In fact, we just want that to be bigger than 0, so 0, 0, 1. Okay, that's perfect. So now we're visualizing the thresh. This is, so if I come here and I'm moving my hands, see, I'm wiggling my hands and that's a solid white. This is exactly what we want. So in the bottom right, I'm wiggling my hands furiously and this is just solid white. And here I'm talking. Let's lower this thresh a bit while I'm talking. Yeah, this is good. So again, in case you need the numbers, I've got 0.048. Let's make the 0.05 as 0.5 for that thresh. And this is going to depend a bit on noise conditions, etc. That's not too important. Let's make that 0.5. And now diff trigger. Let's look at diff trigger. Let's visualize diff trigger. So what we want to do here is, this was, in fact, let me just do this one again. I'm going to copy this diff. And let's call this trigger. And let's visualize that. Go inside, so the outlets, put that on so we can see. Let's select everything and make it nearest so that it's not, it's not interpolating. We don't need the blur, get rid of the blur. We don't need the mono, it's already mono. We don't need the level at the end because this is going to be a binary. So this is very simple now. We've got the incoming map of binary on-off. We're caching it. We want to take the one frame before now because we want the frame where the change happened. So this should be one. We don't even need that to be a parameter. Let's go to edit the custom parameters. We don't need a blur, so we can get rid of let's open. So this is what it looks like. We don't need the pre-shrink. We don't need the size. We don't need the cache index because that's going to be hard-coded to -1 because we want the previous frame no matter what. The thresholds, there is no threshold. We got rid of the levels, so we get rid of that as well. What we do want is, so we don't want this function. What this is doing, this is taking the absolute value. We don't want that because what that will do is it'll trigger when it's going from 0 to white and white to 0. So let's get rid of that. And instead, let's just add a limit. And we want to limit, positive only. And let's look at the normalized split. So if I come here and so it's flickering a lot. And let's also add another threshold here, which can be 001. Again, anything below 001 we want to be off, anything above we want to be white, and we don't want to act on alpha so that we have black. Let's up this a bit. Let me split this into two. Make that a top viewer, put the thresh there, trigger there, and you can see the video there. So look, I'm moving. Let's lower this threshold just so that it's easier for you to see. I'm moving really fast in the bottom right, and this is on, this is off. As soon as I stop moving, I stop, I start moving, this is going to come on and then off, and that's going to stay on. I'm moving, that's on, that's off, I'm going to stop. See, when I stopped, it came on as well. I don't want that. Let's have a look. Okay, that might be because of this actually. This was wrong, that limit, positive only. That must have been taking the absolute value, or we don't need that. The thresh is doing what we need. Let's normalize split. Okay, yeah, that's a lot. So now we have our trigger map. And let's go in here, let's call that diff. We want another in, and let's call this in trigger. And let's make this one the order 1, this one the order 2, just so that I know which one's which easier. So that one at the top is the diff, that one is the trigger. What's that? A stray MIDI out. Let's get rid of that. Let's connect that one there and that one there. Okay, so this, let's put the X back on X. Okay, so that is going into top 2. Let's rename that top to diff. And then let's create another pop 2. Top 2 trigger. And let's make these, whoops. By the way, I could have used a lookup texture, and I will later use this. With the lookup texture, there's a bit more faffing, I think, if I recall correctly, getting this right. But you know, this is, I found out a lot easier to do it like this. And let's connect that to that. So now we have another input. So the first input, the 0th input, we take all of the things. The second input, or you know, 0, 1, that's the color diff. And then here, from that one, we also take the color, and let's call that color trigger. Actually, instead of doing that, let's do this, because we don't need the color. Let's create a math. I don't know what's going to be quicker and more efficient, actually. Let's create math combines here. Because the color is RGB, we just need a single number. So here on the combine, let's do A. This is the diff. So let's take color.r and put that on movement. And then here, let's take color.r and put that on trigger. Oh, of course, got it MIDI trigger. Then here, instead of taking color, we can take movement and write that to movement. It's gonna break. It's gonna break because I got rid of color diff and we were using it. But anyway, we'll fix that. And then on this one, so on this one, we're writing color.r to movement. On this one, we're writing color.r to MIDI trigger. And then here, we actually don't even need this anymore, because we have the attributes that we need. Here we're defining movement. What's going on here? Oh no, we do need, okay, so I take that back. I'm still learning. That's interesting. So here we have the movement attribute. So how do I copy that movement attribute? Okay, so I need to do this. Interesting. I see. MIDI color trigger, what? MIDI trigger. And then here, inputs. Oh, we want to take MIDI trigger and write it. So this is a bit of a weird workflow. We're taking that attribute, and I want to just copy that attribute straight onto this. And the way it seems, there might be an easier way to do this, but what I'm seeing right now is that I need to, here I'm renaming color.r to movement, and here I'm renaming color.r to MIDI trigger, and then here I'm taking in movement as movement. What happens if I put nothing there? Okay, so I'm taking movement and MIDI trigger without renaming, but I need to do this. If I don't do this, then that movement attribute is not copied across. So I need to say write movement to movement and write MIDI trigger to MIDI trigger. Now let's go back to that and put that there. So now there is a MIDI trigger, and it's only going to be on for one frame, the frame that it happens. Okay, math combine. This is math fell. So now that we have trigger, what we want to do is we want to randomize the velocity, the frame that trigger is on. Otherwise, we use the previous velocity. And as I mentioned before, to use the previous means that we're going to need to use a feedback. But before I go into that, I also just want to add here, I want to add another attribute, which is MIDI on. Now we already have this as a top. I could bring in the top, but instead I'm just going to use an if. I'm going to do this one. A is greater than B. So if movement is bigger than 0, 0, 1, And at this point, I don't need to make this a custom variable because I'm already thresholding. That threshold that I've done, by this point, I know that if it's black, it's off. And if it's non-black, it's on because I've done the threshold. So here I can just use an arbitrary small number. And I want to save this to MIDI on. And here you can see I've got my MIDI on, my MIDI trigger. So here's what we want to do. Let's take this random vel out of there. What's this going on? Okay, let's ignore that because we're going to do a whole brand new way of doing this. So we want to, again, randomize the velocity, but only the moment that the trigger is on. And we want to do this per, obviously it's different for every single cell. Every single cell is going to process this on its own accord. And I'm curious how other people might have approached this in Touchdesigner. This is the way that I approached it. Let's just put this back into the chain. Everyone has a random MIDI vel. If I change the seed, it changes. So this is maybe a bit of a hacky way, but just here in the seed, let's type apps time.seconds. So seed is changing constantly. Because the seed is changing constantly, the MIDI velocity is changing every frame. Now what we want to do is, we want to use, let's add a math combine here. Let's say that I do an if A, say A if C, else B. So this, another way of putting this is, if C, then use A, otherwise use B. So for now, let's just put a 1 here. So that's always true. So if true, then use MIDI vel, otherwise use 0. Okay, so what we've done is, if I make that 0, in fact, let's just put 0.5 there. So if this is 0, then it uses 0.5. If I make that 1, then it uses the random incoming. Okay, we're getting somewhere. Let's put MIDI trigger, and this now here, this is happening for all of them at the same time. Let's use MIDI trigger instead. So now they're all 0.5. As soon as I move, the cells where I move gets the random value. But then it goes back to 0.5 because this is trigger, we're using trigger. If I use MIDI on, then while I'm moving, like again here in the bottom right, I'm moving and it's getting the random number. It's changing every frame. We don't want that. I want to use MIDI trigger. So now when I move, just for one frame, it flashes a random number, but then it goes back to 0.5. So we're getting close. What we want is, instead of 0.5, we want to use the random number that it had picked the previous frame. So we need to use feedback. And let me save this because I've had a few crashes with feedback. I think this version actually is a lot more stable. Where's the version? Oh yeah, 30, 70, 70. This version is a lot more stable. So we're going to use the feedback pop, which is just like the feedback top, but we're going to use it in a weird way. I'm going to branch off feedback. So here, I'm creating a branch. What I want to do is, actually let's insert another null here, because we're going to do a whole bunch of other stuff later. And I'm going to call this null end loop. Let's save it again, and I'm going to put that there. And what this does is, we're creating a branch going there, and then from there it's going back to there. And this stops receiving from here. It takes the previous frame from this pop. And what we want to do is we want to insert a math combine again. And we want to connect that to that. What we're going to be doing is, the flow of information comes through here, randomizes the velocity. We actually don't need that one anymore. Goes into that. Actually, no, let me get rid of that, put that there. We're going to use that one. because I've already done the equation. And instead of going to 0.5, it's going to use the value from here. So in inputs, the second input, we want to take Midi-vel. We want to rename it to Midi-vel previous. Here, in the math combine, instead of going to 0.5, we want to go to Midi-vel previous. Let's see if this works. I don't remember if it will. Yep, it does. So it starts off 0.5 because that's what they already were. And every time I move, it should, like if I'm constantly moving, the reason why it's changing probably is because the trigger is being triggered multiple times. So keep your eye on the trigger. What should happen is trigger becomes 1. When it becomes 1, it uses Midi-vel, which is the new one. In fact, let's call this, instead of Midi-vel, let's call this Midi-vel random. And then here, let's write this. Good. This makes it more legible. Oh, and here, this might be a bit confusing. What I just did is, this random is creating an attribute called Midi-vel random. This math combine on the input should take Midi-vel and write it to Midi-vel previous. Yes. This, and then on the combine, takes Midi-vel random. If its MIDI trigger is on, writes that to Midi-vel. Otherwise, writes Midi-vel prev to Midi-vel. The problem is we don't have any Midi-vel to begin with. So here, it's having a problem. So what we need to do is, let's get rid of that. Let's add a new attribute. Let's initialize here, before the feedback, a Midi-vel, make it 0, and so this is the vel. We initialize the vel attribute, go into the feedback, which gets the next one from there. This is randomizing. This one is creating Midi-vel random, which is constantly there. This combine is taking from the second input Midi-vel and writing it to Midi-vel previous, and then here we choose either the previous one or the random one based on trigger, and this is running per point. So as soon as I move, we get a random velocity. Okay, that's pretty good, I think. So now this should just automatically work. I can see that the number's changing a few times, which is why it's sounding a bit weird. Oh, why is my cache index here -1? That should be -5. Okay, I was sitting in a pitch black room. That's why I just put the lights on, and that's why it was struggling a bit. I also remembered that I forgot to do something important, which is in the diff, we need to reset the cache when we change something. We need to do it here. Here, actually, it's not as crucial because we rarely are going to change the video resolution. But I'm just going to do it in case we do. So this is the main diff. And then let's go up. We need to take from the grid, again, copy and put that there. But let me just mute this. Midi. So when this reset happens, it's also going to reset this, which is going to reset our cache. However, in the grid, we did this so that the par exec only happens when cells changes, not the size. Whereas we want to make it when the size happens as well. So I'm just going to do everything actually. When anything changes here, so even if I make that say 1600, see there was a flash because that triggered the reset, which also triggered the reset of the cache. So let's put that back to 1920. And we also want to do that here on this. No, not on the thresh, on the trigger, because this is actually a diff. Let's call it diff trigger so that we remember. So customize that. Take that reset, the pulse. In fact, let's just rename it to reset. And again, on the grid, take the reset and put it on that pitch bind. And also, let's rename it here. Okay, so that's the first thing I want to do. The other thing I want to do that I forgot to do is here. We actually don't need any of this. I'm just going to bypass that. Let's add a levels level. And yeah, we really want to pump this up. Pixelate, customize. We don't need the numbers. Let's put the MIDI back on. Oops, like that. This is -1 again. Okay, so just I must have changed the I must have changed the wrong one. This diff needs to be -5 on the first one, where we're doing the frame differencing from the camera. Okay, sorry, it's late, I'm tired. This is -5 on this one, where we're doing it from the frame. This diff trigger here. Oh yeah, I copy pasted again. Yeah, that one needs to be -1. We only, yeah, see, that's better. Because before, it was looking 5 frames before. That's why it was, because I could hear something weird. See, you can hear it's a bit weird. And also, if you look at the numbers, it flickers a few times. If I make this, for example, -20, it'll be more exaggerated. So what's happening here is for 20 frames, it's copying this, and then it's stopping. So this needs to be -1 on the cache of the trigger. We only want to look at the one previous frame. So here's again our trigger. We have the binary map coming in, which was thresholded. We have a cache size of 2. We look at one previous frame. We subtract it. We threshold to a very, very small number. So anything below that is 0. Anything above is 1. So now this is good. Now, if you look at that as well, let's go back to top viewer and put that there. Yeah, this is good. Okay, and let's go back to adapting. Okay, we're in a good position. Everything's working. On every trigger, this is maybe excessive. Maybe there's a way of only generating the random number on one frame, but hey. So now let's do the scale. I think that's the only thing that's left. The scale we're going to do with GLSL.